Herkese merhaba. Nafi Baba Tasavvuf konuşmalarının bahar döneminin ilk konuşmasına hoş geldiniz. Bundan sonra İngilizce devam edeceğim. Hello everyone. Welcome to the first talk of the spring in our series of Sufism talks at the Nafi Baba Sufism Research Center. Today, it's my honor to present to you Professor Rachida Chih from Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, CNRS, in Paris. The name of her talk is Waking Visions of the Prophet and Sainthood in al-Jazūlī's Dalā'il al-Khayrāt, 15th Century. And I want to present to you Professor Chih. Rachida Chih is a senior research fellow at the CNRS and a member of the Center for Turkish, Ottoman, Balkan, and Central Asian Studies, CETOBAK, and School for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences, HESS. She's a historian of Sufism in the Ottoman Arab lands, modern Egypt, and Morocco. Her most recent published works include an article entitled The Apogee and Consolidation of Sufi Teachings and Organizational Forms, 1453-1683, published in the Wiley-Brackwell History of Islam and Islamic Civilization in 2018. Sufism in Ottoman, her monograph, Sufism in Ottoman Egypt, Circulation, Renewal, and Authority in the 17th and 18th Century, published in 2019. And her article, Prophetic Piety, Mysticism and Authority in Pre-Modern Arabic Devotional Literature, al-Jazūlī's Dalā'il al-Khayrat, 15th Century, published in the International Journal of Middle East Studies in 2022. Thank you, Professor Chih, for accepting to be with us. I leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Zainab, and also Darin, for inviting me to this prestigious seminar. I have attended many talks, and I know that many eminent specialists in the history of Sufism have preceded me here, and I hope that I will live up to the standard and to the honor of your invitation. Before I begin, I would like to read the communiqué that my research institute, the Center for Turkish, Ottoman, Balkan, and Central Asian Studies, has published on the website of the EHESS, of which the CETOBAK is a faculty. Message of support for the victims of earthquakes in Syria and Turkey. The EHESS and the Center for Turkish, Ottoman, Balkan, and Central Asian Studies express their profound solidarity with the inhabitants of the regions of Syria and Turkey affected by the earthquakes that began on 6 February 2023. In the face of this catastrophe, we reiterate our support for the region's populations, which had already faced so much violence and displacement. There are a number of organizations whose mission is to provide aid to the victims, and the CETOBAK is available to provide extensive information on the many supportive initiatives underway. This support must be immediate, but it must also be lasting. The HESS and the CETOBAK mourn with the victims now and in the future, and we are committed to ensure that our research into social sciences contributes in some small way to better days ahead. My presentation, which is called Waking Visions of the Prophet and Sainthood in al-Jazūlī's Dalā'il al-Khayrat, draws on an article that was recently published by Ishmael's Prophetic Piety and Mysticism in Pre-Modern Arabic Devotional Literature, which is in open access. Over the past few years, in the wake of a pioneering work of Cornel Fletcher, a new historiography has re-examined political culture in the great Muslim empires at the dawn of the modern era, in the light of literary and visual sources that had for a long time remained mostly unexplored, along with architectural history. This research has cast light on the links between mysticism and politics through different forms of sacred kinship. The Saadian in Morocco, Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal conquerors linked their epic accomplishments to that of ancient models such as Alexander the Great and to the Prophet of Islam. They saw themselves as renovators of the Prophet's community, continuing his mission, which was the universal victory of Islam. To this end, they appropriated the Prophet's spiritual and temporal heritage. Their claims to the title of universal sovereign are described by historian and palace bureaucrats in quasi-eschatological terms, borrowed from Islamic, especially Akbarian, mysticism. The relationship between the sovereigns and the Prophet had to be made visible through signs, attributes, and rituals. In a recent article called Pietas Ottomanica, the House of Osman and the Prophet Muhammad, Gottfried Hagen describes how, under the auspices of the Ottoman dynasties of the modern period, the cult of the Prophet gives a particular configuration to the Islam of the day, centered on the person of the Prophet and informed by images, by accounts of his birth and mission, and by rituals such as the display of his relics, for example, his mantle and his banner. This cult invokes the Prophet as a presence rather than her historical figure, and promises salvation through love and veneration for his person. These politics of prophetic piety are anchored in a culture and collective memory of the Prophet developed over the longue durée, the long term, and in which the Sufis played a major role. The end of the medieval period saw the culmination of a slow doctrinal evolution that had, over the course of centuries, made the Prophet more than a simple messenger, the founder of a community, a model to be followed, who sooner served as a legal and social norm. The Prophet became a cosmic and metaphysical figure, the origin of the word and its finality, a reality present from all eternity, and a mercy to the worlds. Rahmatan lil alamin. Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 107. This theology of a prophetic presence completed its social integration at the beginning of the modern era under the double influence of political elites and of scholars who were both Sufis and jurists. It is relayed by a rich devotional literature, collections of prayer invoking divine blessings upon the Prophet, salawat, poetry in praise of the Prophet, madayih nabawiyah or nabawiyat, narratives of his birth, mawlidiyat, and of his ascension through the heavens to the divine throne, mi'raj, all to be recited during sumptuous state-organized and state-sponsored public festivities in his honor, such as the Mawlid. I will examine one of these collections of prayers invoking divine blessings on the Prophet, Dalā'il al-Khayrāt wa shawariq al-anwar fi al-dhikr, as-salat ala al-nabi al-mukhtar, proofs of good deeds and brilliant bursts of lights in the remembrance of blessings on the chosen Prophet, composed in Morocco by Muhammad ibn Sulaiman al-Jazūlī, who died in 1465. I am not a specialist of literature, a field that has its own method of analysis. My approach to devotional literature is that of a historian of Sufism. This means that as a historian, I am interested in the question of how to refine the periodization or chronology of the history of Sufism. The relationship between history itself and the beliefs and practices relating to religion is often difficult to grasp, because religious history, while being touched like any social phenomenon by historical events, rarely conforms to the often rapid twists, turns, and upsets of political history. Religious history takes place over the long duration, the long term, and in it, we seek to locate the transmission, exchange, and reappropriation, reinterpretation of ideas and the practices they inspire. I'm interested in the ways in which such devotional texts were critical in the diffusion to popular audiences who were still immersed in an oral culture of the major doctrinal themes that were developed by the early Sufis in the 9th century, fully elaborated by Ibn Arabi in the 13th century, and then spread by those who followed him. While praising the Prophet as God's elect, savior, and seal of the prophets, this literature also describes him as a primordial and cosmic reality, Haqiqa Muhammadiyya, as the light that gave birth to the word, Nur Muhammadi, and as a perfect being, Insan Kamil, who brings together in his person divine realities and human qualities. Present for all eternity, the Prophet continues to act on and intercede in this word directly or through his heirs, the friends of God, awliya Allah, until the day of the last judgment, when he will intercede for all humanity, al-Shafi' fi jami' al-anam. Since the 9th century, with Tirmizi and Tustari, the metahistorical reality of the Prophet and of sainthood, walaya, inherited through Muhammadan prophecy, developed over the long term, but turning points or shifts can be observed in hagiological and hagiographic text. These turning points are linked to political upheaval, marginalization of a caliphate, or to moments of crisis. The Mongol invasion and the fall of the Abbasid Caliphate reinforced the authority of the Sufis, as is indicated by the increase in the number of hagiographies describing a world order in which the true masters are the saints who form an invisible government with its own council, diwan, and hierarchy, above which is the pole, qutb, the supreme recourse and universal succor, ghawth, the archetype of which is the Prophet Muhammad. The belief that a saint provides is protection to a territory, and the people who inhabit it is a major element in pre-modern Islamic society, an important model of social organization and Islamization. The Sufis attributed to themselves the prerogatives of the Prophet in life here below, tawassul, but also most prominently that of the shafa'a, intercession for the salvation of souls. This makes it easy to understand why Sufis are the principal authors of texts that support practices and rituals that would be likely to encourage prophetic piety, and why they became promoters of the cult of the Prophet at exactly the period during which the first great mystical path, tariqah, were founded by Sufi masters considered to be descendants of the Prophet and earthly heirs of his spiritual authority. There was a further shift in the evolution of the concept of sainthood in the 15th century, in the period going from the Mamluk to the Ottomans, which is again indicative of the probably unprecedented authority and social role of Sufis and their institutions in society at the beginning of the modern era. At this time, in Egyptian Sufi scholarly circles, the idea of the possibility of seeing the Prophet in the waking state and being instructed by him was gaining ground. The message that runs through Jazūlī's collection is that continuous recitation in the form of a zikr of the prayer on the Prophet is the best possible method for experiencing the presence of a Prophet in the hope of having a vision of him. This spiritual method will become the very principle of the Muhammadan way, the Tariqa Muhammadiyah. That was my introduction. So now I pass to the collection. So the collection, although it was put together from all the sources, the diffusion of the Dalā'il marked a turning point because it may have been the first collection of prayers on the Prophet to be used in Sufi rituals. According to the historian Vincent Cornell, Jazūlī initially wrote this collection probably in 1453 for disciples in his Sufi brotherhood, a branch of the Shaziliya. This was a time of crisis. Almost nothing was left of Al-Andalus. The Portuguese were threatening the Moroccan coastline, and the country was plunged into the political chaos of the decline and fall of a Marinid dynasty. Jazūlī presented himself as a continuer of the prophetic mission and defender of a Dar al-Islam, working to compile and report hadith traditions that exhort the faithful to pray on the Prophet. This is the spiritual exercise par excellence, but also a rallying cry for Jazūlī's disciple who took part in the defense of the coasts in the Ribat. The Dalā'il initially spread in the scholarly circles in Fez linked to the Shaziliya. Its first collective recitation were organized by a disciple of Jazūlī, Abdul-Aziz al-Tabbā, who died in 1508. Then the collection very quickly spread to the rest of the Maghreb. We have evidence. It is cited by a scholar from Tunis, Barakat al-Arusi, who died in 1492, who also used it as a model when he wrote his own collection, Wasilat al-Mutawassilin, Bifadr al-Salat ala Sayyid al-Mursalin, the support of those who seek intercession through the merit of praying on the Master of the Messengers, which was composed in 1473. Thus, the Dalā'il was not the only Arabic collection of prayers circulating at this time. In his unpublished PhD dissertation, La pratique de la prière sur le prophète en Islam, dedicated to the practice of praying on the Prophet in Islam, Amin Hamidun has listed hundreds of them and their commentaries between 1500 and 1900, peaking in the 18th and 19th centuries. The novelty of these collections lies in their structure, which is based on the model of the Quran, and like the Quran, in the fact that they were intended to be recited aloud regularly by a reader in the same way as and on the model of the Quranic recitations. And like the Quran or Bukhari's Sahih, they were the subject of a khatma.
Rachida, sorry. You have not forgotten about the PowerPoint, right?
No.
Okay. Sorry,
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt.
it's coming. Don't worry.
Sorry.
Thank you for asking. So I was saying the khatm of the Quran is the recitation from beginning to the end in the recommended number of days. So some of these collections, among them the Dalā'il, gave rise to a group of professional reciters, qura, who were paid by the waqf of a mosque in which they were employed. But the Dalā'il surpassed all this collection in gain international popularity. From the Maghreb, the collection spread through the Islamic East and over 2 centuries acquired a quasi-sacred status, especially in the Turco-Ottoman sphere. So on the reception of the Dalā'il in the Turco-Ottoman sphere, I refer you to 2 articles by Guy Burak. They're in those, at least one of them that she's published in the collective, she directed a collective volume. So one of the article is Collating the Signs of Benevolent Deeds, Muhammad Mahdi al-Fasi's commentary on Muhammad al-Jazūlī Dalā'il al-Khayrat and its Ottoman readers. And the second article, Prayers, Commentaries and the Edification of the Ottoman Supplicant. So in terms of form, the collection's success is due, but therein you're right, I can move to another picture. Yeah, in terms of form, the collection success is due to its literary style, structure, and performative function, as I said before. Unlike the more doctrinally dense Sufi prayers of the medieval period with their allusive and symbolic style that was accessible only to initiates, Jazūlī's prayers are easy to grasp, even for the less literate classes. The use of rhyming prose and alliteration creates a musical feel that makes the prayers easy to memorize and thus encourages their ritualization and quasi-liturgical use. The collection borrows its poeticism, lyricism, and emotional power from the praise poetry addressed to the Prophet, the Madih, and is organized around an individual and privileged relationship with the Prophet, whom the believer addressed directly, humbly, and submissively, seeking the Prophet's mediation and expressing yearning and desire to see him. In the introduction, you have a page of a muqaddimah. In the introduction of his collection, Jazūlī clearly expresses his objective. He wants to bring together in zikr form earlier devotional works and invocations drawn from hadith collection so as to facilitate their memorization. Therefore, he produces a readable text unburdened by chains of transmission. You see, for those who can read Arabic here, لذكرى محذوفة الأسانيد ليسهل حفظها. Sorry. So محذوفة الأسانيد ليسهل حفظها على القارئ. So yeah, to produce a readable text unburdened by chains of transmission to make it easier to memorize for the reciter. The organization of a collection differs from one copy to the next and in different editions, but it generally follows a clear sequence starting with an overture, Fifteenth Dalā'il al-Khayrat, that invokes God by his 99 beautiful names. This is followed by an introductory chapter, Muqaddimah, which starts with the dua, with the supplication that I will translate later, and then by a chapter listing more than 30 hadiths. 30 hadiths that are claimed to be authentic, sahih, and relate to the virtues, benefits, and rewards in this word and the next of invoking blessings upon the Prophet. Fasl fi fadl as-salat ala nabi. Then comes a list of 201 of Muhammad's names, Asma Sayyidina wa Maulana Muhammad, the aim of which is to allow the reader to know the Prophet better and understand his unique attributes and qualities. This list sums up the theological and mystical doctrines concerning the person of Muhammad. It underlines the Prophet's elevated rank, al-Maqam, al-Mahmud, al-Daraja, al-Rafi'a, his mercy, Nabi Rahma, Mu'ti Rahma, his assistance, Ghawth, Khiyath, and finally, his intercession on the Day of Judgment, Shafi' al-Ummah, as a function of his divine election, al-Muqtar. In the subsequent passages, more than 400 prayers are divided into 8 sections, Ahzab. Hizb Ahzab is an appellation generally associated with the Quran, which is divided into 60 Ahzab. So it's divided into 8 Ahzab, each of which is itself divided into quarters, arba', and thirds, athlas. Each hizb corresponds to 1 day of the week, and the weekly recitation form from one Monday to the next is perfectly regulated, and the completion the completion of the recitation is subject to a khatm. The contents of a Dalā'il are both didactic and experiential. It teaches, as I said, about the attributes of Muhammad, the proofs of his prophetic status and of his preeminence over all other prophets. Its prayer who also provide the best means for the person reciting them or listening to their recitation to experience the presence of the Prophet. Remembering the Prophet helps one to imagine him as an almost tangible presence and may even spark hope of a sleeping or waking vision of him. So in the opening, so that's the Dalā'il I use for my paper. I find it interesting to show you the cover because it's published with other famous poetry and prayer invoking the Prophet. Especially famous in the Maghreb, for example, you have a Du'a Nasiriyya, which is a Du'at al-Nasiri, which is very famous in the Maghreb, and you have, of course, the Salat al-Mashishiyya, and of course, you have Qasidat al-Burda. So it's interesting that they all published together. That's the okay. So. I go back to where I stopped. So remembering the Prophet helps one to imagine him as almost a tangible presence and may even spark hope of a sleeping or waking vision of him. In the opening supplication, al-Jazūlī calls the Sufis who are granted a vision of the Prophet, the people of the supreme station of sincerity and election. أعلى مقام الإخلاص والتخصيص. God's elect. So this is the opening supplication for those who can read Arabic, but I'm going to give the translation, but those who can read Arabic can follow. So, my God, par virtue, bijah, Nabika Sayyidina Muhammad. So I'm here. So by virtue of the rank, by virtue of the rank and dignity of your prophet, closest to you, our master Muhammad, and of your love for him and his love for you, and by virtue of a secret that subsists between you and him, I ask you to send blessings and peace upon him, as well as to his family and his companions. And I ask you, my God, to increase my love for him and to make me know his reality and his rank, that you might grant it to me to imitate him and follow his conduct and his sunnah. Reunite me with him and grant me the joy of a vision of him. Overwhelm me with the happiness of speaking with him. Remove from me the obstacles, the attachments, the intermediaries, and the veil, and charm my ear with the pleasure of hearing his words. Prepare me to learn from him. Make me worthy to serve him. Let my prayer upon him be a brilliant light, perfect and perfecting, pure and purifying. Pure and purifying, erasing all injustice and darkness, all doubt, associationism and impiety, falseness and sin, and let it be the cause of purification and of elevation, that I might thus attain the supreme station of sincerity and election, such that no other dominion remains in me but yours, that I might be made ready for your presence, and that I might be among your elite, attached to the Prophet's conduct and your sunnah. I try to, I think I need to move to the other page. Attach it's a shame that it's a beautiful supplication, such that no other dominion remains in me but yours, that I might be made ready for your presence, and that I might be among your elite, attached to the Prophet's conduct and your sunnah. May grace and divine salvation be upon him, being upheld by the spiritual support of his elevated presence at each instant and moment. O my God, O light, O evident one, and may divine grace and salvation be upon our Master Muhammad, his family and his companions. So in this supplication, we can see clearly what is at stake. For Sufis in the devotional literature and rituals relating to the cult of the Prophet. Muhammad's heritage, its transmission, and the authority it confers. Sufis are the people whom the Prophet teaches as a master teaches his disciple, and the recitation of Tasliya becomes a way of attaching oneself to the Prophet as a disciple is attached to his master. Prepare me to learn from him, make me worthy to serve him. It is a way of transmitting an esoteric knowledge of the Prophet directly to the disciple during visions of the Prophet, whether sleeping, wakeful, or in in-between state. Grant me the joy of a vision of him. Overwhelm me with the happiness of speaking with him. So in Muslim ideology, the vision of the Prophet gained importance gradually over the long duration. Shifts of this concept are observable in hagiographical literature and in Sufi epistles. One of these pivotal times is the 15th century, when the waking vision of the Prophet became an accepted reality in the circles of Egyptian Sufi scholars. The specific implications of this being that although the vision of a prophet in a dream, attested in numerous hadiths, is possible for every pious Muslim, according to, there are many hadiths about the vision of a prophet in dreams. One of the most famous is whoever has seen Whoever has seen me in a dream surely has seen me, for Satan doesn't appear in my guise. Sufi, so although it's accepted to the dream vision is accepted and attested in Hadith, Sufis developed the idea that there are degrees in the perception of the Prophet's presence, the highest of which, reserved for the category of the elect, is that of actually seeing him in the world of the senses and being guided and inspired by him there. The writings of the Egyptian Sufi Abdul Wahhab al-Sha'rani, who died in 1562, shows this shift from the vision as a sign of prophetic heritage to the vision as a model, as a mode of initiation and spiritual transmission directly from the Prophet. In his Kitab Lawaqih al-Anwar al-Qudsiyya, The Fecundating Sacred Illuminations, a textbook on Sufi ethics, Sha'rani writes, know that the true master, al-Sheikh al-Haqiqi, is the Prophet. He informs us that his own masters, Nuruddin Shuni, Ahmed al-Zawawi, Ali al-Khawwas, Muhammad al-Manzalawi, all practiced the prayer on the Prophet to the point at which they were initiated by the Prophet himself, yakhuduna anhu, and that he educated them directly without intermediary, without wasita. From 1491, Nuruddin al-Shuni instituted the Majlis Salat al-Nabi at Al-Azhar Mosque, a whole night of prayers devoted to the Prophet, a practice that was attacked by some fuqaha, jurists. These assemblies for prayer on the Prophet quickly spread into other Arab provinces of the Ottoman Empire, such as Damascus, where, according to the 17th century historian Muhibbi, it was introduced into the Umayyad Mosque in 1563 by a disciple of Ash-Shuni. The practice, known by the name of al-Mahya, had its own Sheikh al-Mahya al-Sharif al-Nabawi and its Sajadat al-Mahya. These majalis were attested by Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, who died in 1566 in Mecca during the first half of the 16th century. So for Sha'rani, who was probably the most widely disseminated Sufi writer in Egypt from the 16th to the 19th century, the waking vision of a Prophet gives the saint the rank of jurist, mujtahid. Relying on the metaphysical principle derived from Ibn Arabi, he underlined the superiority of the mystical inspiration of the Sufi, who receives knowledge of the legal judgments in its fullness by means of unveiling, by means of kashf, and in a waking vision directly from the Prophet. His idea of the possibility that the mystic should have direct access to the source of the Sharia, Ayn al-Sharia, is theorized in his textbook Al-Mizan al-Kubra, The Universal Balance, studied by Samuela Pagani. Just a quick note. I've not yet read Samer Dajani's book, which has just come out, Sufis and Sharia, The Forgotten School of Mercy. It was just published by Edinburgh University, 2023. I had a quick look at the contents and I thought that his chapter 8 is entitled The Scale, Mizan, of Abdul Wahhab al-Sha'rani, but I haven't had time to read this book, which just came out. So Sha'rani confirms in the biographical note dedicated to his teacher, al-Suyuti, who died in 1505, that appears in his Tabaqat al-Kubra, Tabaqat al-Sughra, the minor book of the generations, that al-Suyuti did lay claim to the status of absolute mujtahid mutlaq. He follows this information with the discussion on al-Suyuti's miraculous waking visions of a prophet. Suyuti, who claims to have seen the prophet in the waking state more than 70 times, wrote a long fatwa called The Illumination of Darkness about the vision of the prophet and the angels, تنوير الحلاق في إمكان رؤية النبي والملاك, in which it states that the vision يقظة, waking, in a waking state, of the prophet is a divine favor, a karama, specific to the saints. Suyuti's companion, Abd al-Qadir ibn Mughayzir al-Jazūlī, who died in 1489, is the author of a treatise on the miraculous visions of the prophet in the waking state, with which God's elects are blessed. الكواكب الظهيرة في اجتماع الأولياء يقظة بالسيد الدنيا والآخرة. The shining stars on the meeting of the saints in the waking state with the Lord of this world and the next. Al-Suyuti also claimed another title closely linked with Mujtahid status, that of Mujaddid, the renewer of religion of the 15th centuries. In accordance with the Hadith, indeed, God will send to this community at the beginning or end, Ras, of every 100 years, one who will renew for it its religion. But the concept of Tajdid is defined in the doctrine of Sufi jurists as the uninterrupted process of revelation through infinite spiritual interpretation of the scriptures. It relates closely to the doctrine of sainthood, walaya, and to the messianic figure of the renewer, which can be identical with the Qutb, the supreme pole and head of the hierarchy of saints. The reason for the return of this theme of Tajdid in the modern period is that the Prophet became the master of numerous Sufis who were renewing old paths or founding new ones. The Indian Ahmed Sirhindi, the Syrian Mustafa al-Bakri, the Medina's Muhammad al-Saman, the Maghribi Ahmed al-Tijani, all of these masters claimed the same status in the order of sainthood as that of the Prophet within his community. The orders they founded, the Naqshbandiyya, Mujaddidiyya, the Khalwatiyya, the Samaniyya, the Tijaniyya, played major religious, social, and political roles in the 18th and 19th century amid European colonialism. So I'm going to stop here because I was told to talk for 40 minutes. I think I respected the timing, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Chih. This was a fascinating talk and so clear and so easy to follow for all of our listeners, but very dense at the same time. I have many questions myself, but I want to start with, I take the questions and then I usually leave myself for last. So just to say that as usual, we send to everyone, we send the questions to, you just got a message about you sending your questions to Fatih. Thank you, Fatih. But I will start with a question by Derin Terzoğlu, two questions by Derin Terzoğlu. Could you elaborate, she says, could you elaborate a bit more on the factors that made the 15th century a turning point in the popularization of Prophet-centric Sufi piety? Do you think this trend was more pronounced in the Maghreb in that time? I will give you the second question as well, so maybe you can.
I think if you don't mind, Zainab,
yes,
I will of it at a time because I'm not so comfortable with English.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, this is a very important question. And as I said during my introduction, as historian, we always try to understand, how religious history unfolds it's a history that often is constant reinterpretation of all things, and why some periods see a reinterpretation of old concepts. First of all, I think that I wonder if this period, this transitional period between the Mamluk and the Ottoman period, and I think it's a period during which Sufis in Egypt felt more comfortable to talk about doctrinal concepts that were often attacked during the medieval period by the fuqaha, the jurists who stick to the letter and of the scriptures. The arrival of the Ottomans, I mean, if I take the example of Sha'rani, we all know that the Ottomans were much more open to Akbarians' ideas, and that the reception of Ibn Arabi, when at the time during that in the Mamluk Sultanate, when Ibn Arabi was attacked by a lot of fuqaha, like following the school of Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Arabi was more accepted in the Ottoman lands, and the arrival of the Ottoman is a moment for Sufis when they felt more free to talk about doctrinal concepts that were for which they were, before the arrival of the Ottomans, attacked. So those working on this period all know the relationship of the Ottomans with Ibn Arabi, the fact that the first thing, one of the first acts of Selim when he arrived in Damascus is to restore and even build a beautiful mausoleum on top of the tomb of Ibn Arabi, which was completely abandoned before his arrival. And the fact that also Ibn Arabi, well, we know that this document is a false, but a document attributed to Ibn Arabi predicted the conquest and the victory of the Ottomans in the Arab lands. So I think that the context is more favorable for the expression and the visibility of doctrinal concepts that were during the Mamluk time, that were attacked by the fuqaha. So I think that the Ottoman and the relationship with Akbarian, I mean, a lot of, also I could mention the fact that a lot of spiritual counselors of the sultans were Akbari Sufis. So I think it was a more favorable time for the concept to be more visible. Then the second reason is that during the turn of the 15th century and the turn and the end of the medieval period is a new wave of expansion of Sufism. Sufis followed conquerors, whether Babur coming to India or the relationship between the Shaziliya with the Sa'adian, and also the Sufis following the conquest. And there were expanding to new territories. So I think it's also a sign of a new expansion, and maybe, as I said during my speech, maybe a sign of an unprecedented power of Sufis during before the arrival of the Ottomans, but especially because most Sufi accompanied the conquest of new land. And I think also it's a very interesting question, Darren. I think your question is actually could be the point of a debate. I think also I mentioned the idea of the sacralization of a territory by the presence of a saint. The idea that the saint is the inheritor through the prophet of this divine this barakah. So the idea that the presence of a saint in a new territory sacralize this territory is a major phenomenon. So the reason why the Sufis followed the conquest is that the installation of a Sufi in the Zawiya, just the presence of the Sufi in the Zawiya, sacralize the territory and give it its Islamic stamp. I'm not sure if I'm clear, because these are ideas I'm used to present in French. So now I have to translate it in my mind into English while I'm speaking to you. But yeah, the relationship with the presence of a saint, whether alive or dead, sacralize the territory. So that's why, and I think not enough work has been done. I know that I've read recently the PhD of Maxime Durocher on the spread of a Zawiya in Anatolia, but that's and also that Nelly Amri has done a similar work in Tunisia, following the fall of the caliphate and the major plague epidemics. She has studied the spread of a Zawiya in the territory during the 14th century. And at the same time, so the Zawiya was spreading at the same time when hagiographies will talk of the presence of a saint that will sacralize and bless a territory. And so it's yeah, I don't know if I have given you enough information, but yeah, there are lots of elements that could explain the role of political elite that were, for reasons of legitimation, the Ottomans, being non-Arab and non-descendant of Quraysh, they had to find the legitimacy with the superior link to the Prophet, which is a spiritual one. Which is even superior than the flesh, than being flesh descendant of a prophet, and they found the basis for this ideology in mystical terms and concepts. So the relationship of the Sultan to the mystic for reason of political legitimation, but also for genuine respect for the saints, it's not only pure interest, it's both, and gave the saints of the time unprecedented authority and power. Plus, they subsidized and sponsored a lot of their institutions. So no wonder that at this time, Sufi writing give themselves such an authority equivalent as the Khilafah, the prophetic heritage, because they were their authority was probably unprecedented at this time.
Thank you very much. I'm reading her Darren's second question. She says, as far as I know,
sorry, can I just?
Yes, you can actually go.
May
I can also leave the floor.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. May
her.
I just interfere, because I think Fatih has dropped out from the system. There's a problem. I was trying to, send a follow-up question, but I cannot send it. So sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for your answer. But may I just go ahead and speak? Is that?
Yes, please ask yours. Yes, yeah. And for everyone afterwards, let's do it the old way and just raise our hands. I saw Yasemin's hand, and I do have another question after Yasemin, but Mohammed,
Sorry.
you can also raise your hand. Okay.
Sorry I mean, I don't want to monopolize.
No. So I did not notice Fatih was gone, so this is great.
Yeah, somehow it's not going. So I think we have to do it orally. I just, thank you. I just have one little hesitation with your answer. It has to do with your labeling of the 15th century as a transitional period between the Ottomans, between the Mamluks and the Ottomans. So I was wondering whether you think the Ottoman takeover was already anticipated, let's say in the first half or middle of the 15th century. And regardless, I mean, why would the takeover be? So that's.
No, I think this is also a very good question. No, I think that this Suyuti died in 1505. He lived before the arrival of the Ottomans, and already these concepts of a relationship to the Prophet and of the walaya, not only given not only through the relation with, not only being a divine election, but also being the heritage of Muhammad, was already important at the time before the arrival of the Ottomans. Mm-hmm. The things we have to know is that Suyuti was a Shazili, mm-hmm. Sha'rani was a Shazili, and I think there is an influence of Maghrebi. They had Shazili master, and I think there was an influence among these Sufi scholars of the Shaziliya at that time. So I think we have to bear in mind the role of the Maghreb, where Sharifian dynasties and the relationship between Sharifian dynasty and the Sufis were already a concept of political organization. So I think I would suggest that there were already a kind of influence coming from the Maghreb among Sufi scholars. And in a whole, my idea is to say that that these two, I mean, the Maghreb and Egypt, played a central role in the diffusion, conceptualization, and the transmission of prophetic piety and of sainthood inherited through the Prophet during that time, that would feed political ideology, Ibn Arabi also being Maghrebi. So I think there is some premises coming from the Maghreb to Egypt, and then would then spread and become more visible in the Ottoman period. I hope I'm clear.
Miriam, would you like to ask the other question as well?
No, I think other people should ask.
Okay, well, okay. Yasemin, I think it's your turn.
I didn't raise my hand.
Sorry, I'm mute. Mohammed, yes, go ahead, please.
Firstly, thank you for the clear talk. My primary question was asked by Derin Terzioğlu, but I have a small question about Sharia, and what was, the thoughts, the notion of Sufis regarding Sharia, and how al-Jazūlī and other Sufi and contemporary Sufis distinguished it from Sunnah, and what was the relationship between them? Because you mentioned something, but I missed the point, you know, and maybe it's a silly question, but
No, there is no silly question at all. It's just a very, yeah, I'm not a specialist of Sharia, but of course, I mean, do you study Sufism? Have you studied Sufism?
yes.
You know, the concept of Sufis, Sharia, Haqiqa, and yeah, no, Sharia is should the respect and application of the Sharia should lead to Haqiqa, to the true knowledge of God. But concerning the Sunnah, well, I can't go back to the beginning of Islam, and also I'm not a specialist of Sharia, but the Sharia is based on the Quran and the Sunnah. And what is interesting is that the Sunnah was became a source for Sharia around the 9th century. I mean, Mutahaddithin, the specialists of Hadith, started compiling the traditions of the Prophet in mid-8th century. But it was a long the compilation of the big Hadith compendium took where happened in a long period. They start compiling Hadith of the Prophet, but at the 9th century, the Hadith became a source of the Sharia as sacred as the Quran. That's why that's the principle of Sunnism. From the moment that the Sunnah was accepted as sacred as the Quran as a source of Sharia, of course, the Prophet was considered as ma'soom, infallible, and so the infallibility of the Prophet is at the base of the Sunnah, because as soon as you consider the Sunnah as sacred as the Quran, the Prophet has to be considered as infallible, and then so Sufis of course follow the Sunnah and follow the Sharia, but they claim a superior knowledge of the Sharia and of the revelation itself by the kashf, by the unveiling, the true message, the truth, the haqiqah of the divine message. You're bringing back to explaining about Sufism, and during that period, in the 15th century, as I was saying, Sufis claim to be able to understand the source of Sharia because they are gifted with the karama of unveiling the true message of God. I don't know if I have answered. You asked me a too difficult question to answer in English, to be honest.
Thank you.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, please. I hope I can.
Yes, go ahead.
You know, these popular texts emerged in crisis periods, and for instance, similarly, Vesiletun Necat authored in, you know, Regency period in Anatolia. Similarly, Jazūlī's birthplace is also a frontier, and the situation of North African Muslims deteriorating, because of expansion of Castilla and Portuguese kingdoms. And I think, what was the role of this popular text in making ummah or perception of ummah, and how did change throughout the ages from 15th century to our days? And maybe it is maybe it is difficult or silly question, but it is my so thank you.
I'm going to answer quickly this question because, again, it's a very big question. But Wasilatun Najat was written in the beginning of the 14th century, if I'm not mistaken. But I think, Darine or other Ottomanists will be more qualified than me to answer this question. But I think that the organization of the Mawlid gave this poem, which is a Mawlidiyya, the Wasilat Najat, if I'm not mistaken, to be recited during the Mawlid of the Prophet. Of course, it gave this text extraordinary popularity, and it was the text. I mean, is probably until today the most famous Mawlidiyya and of the Prophet. So I think its popularity, it's linked with the fact that at a certain period, so sources specified that the first Mawlid must have been organized in, but tell me, Darine, I can see you, but I mean, in 1588, but probably was organized before that date, but we don't have evidence. Yes, I see Darine saying yes, but it's true that's why I'm saying that we have to consider the role of the political elite in the expansion of Sufi ideas and doctrine. Without the sponsorship of political elite, we won't understand why, Sufis and their writings become popular at a certain period. If we don't, it's always political, to my mind. So Wasilat Najat became very popular when the Sultan started organizing and sponsoring the celebration of the birth of the Prophet Muhammad. But you can understand that, of course, if I'm not familiar to Wasilat Najat, but I know that at some point when the birth of the Prophet is announced, people stand as a sign of respect to the Prophet. You can understand that this very highly emotional text does create a kind of collective emotion, collective piety, and collective identity. So your question is it's a good question. Of course, it does create a sense of collective identity and collective piety. So then, of course, the 19th century imperialism, colonialism is, to my mind, the real rupture in this long-term culture. It's what I'm presenting now. It's a culture. It's a centuries-old culture that came to an end, and a brutal end, during imperialism and colonialism. So the real fracture is is the 19th century. And if you want, because you were asking me, what about today? You were asking me a question about how long this, so that's my view.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask a question, if I may. If I remember correctly, the legend surrounding the composition of the Dalā'il, it includes a little girl who sees al-Jazūlī, who performs a miracle with water, with ablution water, who then explains that this is because she prays on behalf of the Prophet and not to the Prophet, as we would expect, or directly to God. And this, so I want to ask you about this. When I think about a story like this, I think about the egalitarian aspect of these the egalitarian aspect of these types of visions. So if you can have directly as a young, well, it doesn't matter if this is true or not, right? I mean, in the collective conscious, what matters is it's collective resonance. So on the one hand, it seems like such visions allow Sufis or folk to transcend certain boundaries, transcend certain hierarchies, and directly access the source, which is what they're claiming. So there appears to be on that front, it sounds like there's an egalitarian aspect to it. But at the same time, as you were explaining these visions, you were making it very clear that that this is for God's elect, that there is a hierarchy of types of vision, and the waking visions are at the very top. So they are reserved for God's elect, which, in general, I guess, calling Sufism egalitarian can be quite wrong. So, could you explain, I wanted to get your thoughts on that, how, on this tension between political power and the political context, and the very possibility of transcending it through a direct link to the Prophet, which is in one sense ahistorical.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Zainab. In the mind of the masters and on the Sufis, I've studied the writings, whether al-Jazūlī or Sha'rani, Suyuti, al-Mughayzir, in their minds and in the minds of, because we have to bear in mind that when we study Sufism, we have access only to the voices of those who are scholars, who can write, and what they write about themselves. They write about themselves, and they write about, how would I say, in a kind of Bourdieu, about the transmission of their authority, kind of Bourdieu sociology. So their writing is a justification of their authority, and when they write about the visions of the Prophet, they insist on the fact that these visions are accessible not to all Sufis, not to the simple disciple. They are accessible only to a few masters, the masters, the maîtres. So only a few masters can access this karama, which is the biggest karama, because how do we recognize sainthood? Through karamat, miracles or divine favors, divine blessings. But the waking vision is the biggest karama that a saint could achieve. But this biggest karama, only a very few masters could attain And these masters often, they are founders of Sufi orders. The disciples are encouraged to practice, but only a few of them will attain this supreme rank, as I said, which is the rank of the sincerity and the election. So, and these not usually are the founders of Sufi orders. So there is a sense of hierarchy which is very strong in these writings, and it's a justification. These writings are often almost autobiographical, in a sense that they are about Sha'rani writes about himself, he has inherited from Suyuti and his masters, and he is in a chain, in an isnad, in a chain of transmission, and only those who belong to this chain of transmission are the masters, and may even attain the rank of Qutb in the hierarchy of saints. That's how I can answer this question.
So no egalitarianism whatsoever is the answer.
No.
But I think
there is, if you study Sufism, there is a similarity between political concept and Sufi concept. Sultan al-Arifin, the Sultan of those who know God. You know, it's very, very similar in a sense, yeah.
Thank you. Derin, maybe you want to ask your other question.
Is that okay? If there are other people with questions, I don't want to dominate, so.
Well, we don't have anyone else raising hands now, so go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I could repeat my question or actually connect it to my earlier question, the first one. Basically, okay, let me try to phrase it. I mean, I have one specific question and one larger question, which is probably unfair to pose at the end of a talk, but I'll just, put it out there. So you don't have to respond. In sort of longue durée histories of both Sufi piety, but also Islamic piety in general, people put a lot of emphasis on the 18th century as the time when this kind of prophet-centric so-called orthodox Sufism, some call it neo-Sufism, became prevalent. On the other hand, we know that these, very important texts, also very popular, widespread texts, such as the Dalā'il, al-Khayrat, the Muhammadiyya, Mevlid, etc., were written long before, and we have Birgivi's Tariqat al-Muhammadiyya in the 16th century. So, yeah, I mean, one question that I had for all of us, I guess, but also for you, is how do we, make sense of all these different turning points? What's, what's happening? Already you talked about the 15th century, but then, new stuff is happening in the 18th century. For instance, as far as I know, the Dalā'il al-Khayrat, especially the illustrated copies, became especially, but in general, the Dalā'il al-Khayrat compilations, the texts became especially popular in the central lands of the Ottoman Empire from the 18th century onwards. At least that's my impression. So I was wondering whether, quite independently of what was different in the what happened between the 15th and 18th centuries, I was wondering whether you could tell us a bit more, if it's known, about the dissemination specifically of the Dalā'il al-Khayrat after the 15th century.
Yeah, I think I would answer now because, again, it's a very important question, and in itself, it could be the topic of a whole debate. So first, I want to bring an anecdote. When Abdel Wahab, Muhammad Abdel Wahab, the eponymous founder of Wahhabiyya, made starting his predication, you say, you say predicate, sa prédication. This predication is teaching it. He burnt the Dalā'il al-Khayrat, what we called an auto-da-fé. He made an auto-da-fé of a Dalā'il al-Khayrat because he said, and we have, I could give you the reference about this, and he caused a lot of emotion among, because the news that he burned the Dalā'il al-Khayrat it sent a shock wave, I mean, to the rest of the Arab world. He burned the Dalā'il al-Khayrat because he said it was loved more than the Quran itself. And he was wrong, and he wasn't wrong, because we specialists of art history and codicology and the Dalā'il spread all over the Muslim world. In Egypt and in Syria, historians have worked on Mahkama Sharia records and on what people would leave when they die. I don't know how you call it, and often in these records you have the list of their private libraries, and Dalā'il was everywhere. So this raises the question, of course, of the use of the Dalā'il. And you're right to say that the fact that it has illustrations is one of the main reasons for its immense popularity, because, of course, studies have been done by, what's her name, Hiba Abid, and probably Christian Gruber, but especially Hiba Abid, how the pictures, I mean, it was almost a talismanic use. Again, to me, I really link this prophetic piety and the authority of the Sufi to the political elite who identified themselves to this khilafah, to the Prophet and on earth. I mean, we all know about the work of, as I mentioned in my introduction, on this new historiography on sacred kinship. I think the khilafah, the spiritual and the khilafah to the Prophet is the major political ideology of the Muslim empires until well into the 18th century. So for me, it's the then why the 18th century is a new turn. But this is a debate, as you know, therein between those who this new has been rejected, and nobody now is, but still as historian, because it has been rejected by specialists of text, and they insisted that the writings of these Sufis of the 18th century are are not new. Their ideas are taken from the teaching of Ibn Arabi, and which is true. But the context is new. You can't get rid of the context, and the context is that of the decline of the Muslim empires, and that of a religious renewal that goes with it. And this religious renewal takes different forms, whether the Wahhabiyya in Arabia, or this new foundation like the Naqshbandiyya Mujaddidiyya and or the Khalwatiyya in Egypt. I worked on the Khalwatiyya myself, or the Sanusiyya, the Tijaniyya. So there is a new context of decline of the Muslim empires that gave different form of religious renewal, whether Wahhabi or Sufi, a new une résurgence religieuse linked to the decline of the empires, and that explain why during the 19th century these orders like the Tijaniyya, the Mujaddidiyya will be at the front of the resistance against colonialism until they were completely conquered and then replaced by new forms of reformism. So I think that's the reason for your question is interesting, because the ideas on which these new founders of the 18th century rely, they go back to Jazūlī, to Sha'arani, to Suyuti, but they are just in this new context. They are reappropriated, reinterpreted in this new context of decline of the empires. But I understand that you're like me. I think you really concerned with this kind of periodization and try to understand. And this, as I said, we need more research, and it's not an easy way to make it, because religious history doesn't always coincide with the changing of. Thank you anyway for your question, but we should one day organize a conference on this topic.
There are so many debate topics open now. Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions? I think not. Professor Chih, I thank you. We all thank you at the Nafi Baba Center for this wonderful talk, and we're looking to host you here in person.
I would love to. Please invite me. Thank you again for your invitation. I would like to say hello to Daphna, who I can see on the screen. We work together on the journal of Sufi studies, so it's nice to see her. Thank you for your invitation. I hope, my English was not too bad.
No problem whatsoever.
Yeah, and it was a pleasure exchanging with you. And again, I don't know what to say. I know the situation is difficult in Turkey, and all my heart, with my heart, I'm with you. And I don't know what to say, but I know you're going through a difficult time, and we think of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for being with us.
Bye-bye. Thank you.